Hello, and welcome to today's Safety and Health webcast, The Path to Comprehensive Operational Risk Management, sponsored by IHS. My name is Kyle Morrison. I'm the Senior Associate Editor with Safety and Health magazine, and I'll be moderating today's session. Thank you for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start the presentation, but first I want to go over a few housekeeping items. The views of the speakers and their organization are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Mention of any commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the Council or the magazine endorse them. At the conclusion of today's webcast, we'll have a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply type it in the text box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, then click the Submit Question button. Feel free to ask your question at any point during the presentation. You do not have to wait for the question and answer session to begin in order to ask your question. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can, but due to the high volume of participants today, not all of the questions may be answered. However, any unanswered questions that we don't get to today will be forwarded on to our speakers. For basic troubleshooting information, please click the Help button located on your screen. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete an evaluation survey, and I'll talk a little bit more about that after the presentation finishes. This webcast will be archived for 3 months, so you can access it after today's live presentation. Within about a day, just simply return to the same URL address to access the webcast. Okay, with that, I think we're ready to begin. We have 2 speakers today. Todd Lunsford is the Senior Manager of Solution Engineering for IHS, where he specializes in operational risk management and consults for companies to help drive their operational excellence programs. John Mercadante is the Director of IHS's Solution Strategy for Operational Risk Solutions and has 15 years' experience in designing and optimizing technologies to drive business performance. Todd?
Thank you, Kyle. It's my pleasure to be speaking with everyone today, and thank you for joining our webinar. And what I'd like to challenge you with as our audience today, right out of the start here, is think of some questions that you can ask John and I. We're going to be introducing some, what we think are very interesting topics. These are areas that John and I are both very passionate about. We work closely with a lot of companies to help them solve these problems. So we'd really like to hear from you, both at the end of this webinar and as follow-up after the webinar. So please encourage you to think of some good questions for us as we go through this. So I'd like to start by giving you a brief introduction to IHS, in case those of you attending are familiar with our organization. And so I'll put some data points here for you about IHS. And as you view those, I'd really like for you to take away that we are a unique company and a very interesting company that solves a lot of different problems for our customers. And so across the bottom of this slide, you can see some of the areas where we're working with our customers to provide solutions. And John and I work within our EHS and sustainability area that you see in the middle there. And as a part of our EHS and sustainability solutions, we help our customers to meet their operational and financial goals by planning for and managing risks so they can reduce their operational costs, they can drive efficiencies in their workflows, they can optimize resources through the proper allocation of resources, and they can uncover opportunities for growth. So those are some main goals that our customers have in the area of EHS and sustainability that we are tasked with helping them achieve. So as we introduce this topic of comprehensive risk management, we wanted to pose some questions to you, things that you're probably asking internally at your organization. And if you haven't, we'd like you to consider, are you focused on the right risks? And are you confident that you are focused on the right risks? How do you prove that you are? And if you're not, what might happen? Or what is happening if you're not focused on the right risk? And as you think about this, I know many of you are from different industries. Your organizations are very unique. So I'd also think about what are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and what are the problems that you're trying to avoid through better risk management. So we're working with organizations that are tasked with solving some pretty big problems, with avoiding some pretty significant unplanned events and incidents. And so the example that I'm showing here is that many of the organizations that we deal with are doing all they can to reduce the likelihood of unplanned events and undesired outcomes. And they're using approaches and measures that help them to affect and improve that outcome. So, for example, we have several companies that want to reduce injuries, might be focused on reducing the lost time and the cost of safety and injuries. Other organizations might be focused on things like production uptime. And so those organizations are going to be focused on broader measures to make sure that their operations are reliable. Again, there may be a focus on things like quality or customer satisfaction. And in that case, the measures you might be looking at are things like recalls and complaints and nonconformances. So what I'd like you to think about as John and I talk through these concepts is, what is your desired outcome in your role and for your organization? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Is it improvements in quality, improvement in uptime, improvement in safety, improvement in reliability? Those outcomes may vary. But regardless of the business area, the outcome, the unfortunate pattern that we're seeing across industries is that significant unplanned events continue to occur despite the best efforts of organizations who are doing some very good things and some heroics to improve their performance and to avoid these undesired outcomes. And so we're going to talk about some approaches to help improve the outcomes, improve the performance that organizations are trying to achieve. And the problem is real. The problem is, you can see from some research here, very prevalent in terms of a lot of issues that are happening, as you know, are preventable, and it's frustrating, given your accountability to solve these problems, that a lot of them are happening from preventable causes, that they're costly, and that a lot of time, resources, and money spent fixing the same issues, thanks to the research here from Mr. Peter Merrill. And this becomes a very frustrating problem, especially, again, for those of you that are accountable for solving it. And just to drive this point home, I'll start with an example from an organization that John and I have talked with, who, through their operations, they had this failure of a pump. And you think about this pump malfunction just in one of their locations, and it happened 3 times. So 3 times a pump failed. They had to replace this pump. After fixing the same issue over and over again and doing it right the 3rd time, they realized they had the wrong pump. They were using a vertical pump and a horizontal pump rather, and a vertical pipe, which if they, the first time this malfunction occurred, had investigated, just followed the process for, following up on the issue and looking into it and investigating it properly, they would have discovered that first time the root cause and would have got it right the first time. And so instead of spending, upwards of 6 times the cost to fix this issue, had they just followed the process correctly, then they would have addressed it the first time. So think about a scenario like that for your organization, and the fact that this is happening day in and day out in all different departments and areas of your company, and how that adds up when these problems aren't appropriately addressed. And so at this point, I'd like to transition to John, and what I'd like to do is say a note about John. He's accountable in our organization for addressing these problems for our customers, And as a part of that, he spends a lot of time talking to folks like yourselves on this call to learn more about their problems and help to provide solutions for those problems. So, John, I'll turn it over to you to share a little bit about why there's a disconnect in terms of some of these problems persisting in organizations.
Thank you, Todd. So what I'm going to – my apologies. Technology. Hold on. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to share with you is a little bit of what we've seen in industry, what has been done to date as far as what things are being measured and how responses are being done inside of an organization, as Todd outlined. There's a lot of heroics inside of an organization, and because there's so many things and so little resources, it's very difficult to consistently make the right decision at the right time. So what I'm going to share with you is a little bit about what we call a risk EKG. And everybody knows what an EKG is. We look at a risk EKG as something that's looking forward in time. And the things that are building out, this first line is really around the risk tolerance. Every organization, every facility, every organization has a risk tolerance. And unfortunately, there's every person has a risk tolerance also. And in the world it is today, personal risk tolerance gets in the way of organizational risk tolerance. Sometimes we accept more risk as an individual. Sometimes we accept less risk, even if we're in a very risky business. As you look at the things that are being executed on a daily basis, activities that are being accomplished on a daily basis, this blue line, this jagged line, it just depicts the activities that are being performed and let's just say a combined risk score of all those things that are being done in the organization. So as you see in this, there's two time periods where it is over your organization's risk tolerance. The challenge with that is there are a tremendous number of activities that are being performed within a facility or within a company. Let's take it to a facility level. Within a facility that does not have an associated hazard or associated controls with them. So what's happening is you have your jagged line that is your known things. These are the known things that are happening out there that have some association to known hazards. Then you have all those things that are happening out in the field that does not have that association. So it's your unknown. The challenge with all of that is with unknowns, you're making decisions based on incomplete data. One of the things organizations do, during times of, let's say, construction or rework on a piece of a facility or a plant or a station, what have you, they'll take production down. They'll bring it down because that is the best way to mitigate the risk based on the way the work has been planned out. And so we depict that with the green line. All planning is happening today through really just a heavy reliance on experienced people. And as we know, in industry today, in every industry today, the changing workforce, whether it's the baby boomers retiring or just the technology change in the younger generation of our employees, there's a lot of change in the marketplace, and we won't be able to rely on our workers and their knowledge. We have to be able to systematize this data to make it usable and sustainable every day. So with that, we look at the risk EKG and say, all right, if we could drive consistency, if you can drive consistency to all your facilities around the business processes that are being executed every single day, and you can reallocate your workload based on looking at that risk score of all the activities that are being done, and allocate that and spread that risk throughout, maybe a longer time period or some other mechanism, and allow you to drive a different mix where much fewer pieces are over your tolerance. So in essence, you're able to reduce the amount of planned downtime. So that same bit of work that I went through in the previous slide, replanned through using a risk lens, you're able to reduce your planned downtime by 30 to 50%. And this has been proven. We have many organizations that have been able to do this time and again, but have difficulty repeating it. And the difficulty repeating it is more due to the lack of either time or information, or in some cases the right people. So what we want to do is help companies increase the visibility from the bottom up and combine that with the top-down data around the risks that are imposed on the business to help the planning process drive more efficient outcomes to drive the performance metric you desire. And this performance metric, again, the green line, just in generic terms, is production. And it could be many other things, but in this example, we wanted to do really planned downtime.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, John. Just as you think about John's example, think about, again, the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And by doing these principles, driving consistency, improving execution, increasing visibility, think of the impact you could have on other outcomes such as unplanned downtime. Just by doing these good practices, you're going to reduce the unplanned events that occur in your organization.
Thanks, Todd. Now, there are a tremendous amount of business processes that are associated to what I'll call a comprehensive risk management strategy inside of an organization. And a lot of times you'll hear about it. We hear about it. It's the operational management system. Again, it's a collection of business processes that tell you how to run your business. Whether it's your standard operating procedures, whether it's your loading and unloading processes, whether it's your risk assessment things. It's everything that deals with reactive business processes, so those things that are unplanned. Those events do happen, again, whether you constitute that there was a real consequence or there was no consequence, but something occurred that really was unexpected. That could be an injury. It could be a slip and a fall. Nobody got hurt. But, you want to learn from that and make sure that, the water that was on the ground, that it gets addressed and really get to the heart of, well, how did the water get there in the first place? Oh, it was this tank was, perspiring or what have you. But also, you take all these different reactive business processes, and transportation is a tremendous one. You look at the roadways today, whether you have a transportation company where you have a trucking or rail cars, or marine, there's just, a lot of different things that can happen there. But one of the leading cause of fatalities, is your vehicle transportation, and it's something that every company looks at and tries to assess, well, how does that relate to the other side of the equation, which is the proactive business processes. So am I seeing the things that I'm seeing on my reactive measures, the events that are occurring in my organization? Am I assessing those risks correctly to mitigate them so we don't have the adverse effect? So, on the proactive events, it might be your risk assessments, which could be, your PHAs, HAZOPs, your FMEAs, but it goes all the way to your management system audits, your inspections. There's just a tremendous amount of business processes, and this is not to be an exhaustive list. This is really to give an example, because really the bottom line is the importance of this, the connection between the things that happen in an unplanned way and all those business processes that you have to help you identify risk and put in the proper controls or barriers, safeguards, in case something does happen. And it's that connection, that common elements between all of your different business processes that drive to the knowledge and the results that you desire. Ultimately, every business process that gets executed drives an action that could occur in the organization. Well, as I'm sure that everybody on this call does not have an abundance of resource capacity to do every action they should do. So they have to have a way to prioritize those actions to make sure they do it in accordance to reducing the likelihood of either a bad event or reducing the risk to operations. And when we look at the heart of the things we're going to go through over the next few slides, it's really the convergence of your business processes and how they drive your controls and safeguards, your hazard and risk, that association. It drives that knowledge and how to use that knowledge inside your organization to help drive better decisions.
Yes, that's good. And John, if I could interject with an example here, hopefully one that we can all relate to, and that's from Exxon Mobile. And, you may not be Exxon Mobile, but, obviously a company that faces real risks and, needs a comprehensive approach to managing those risks. And for Exxon Mobile, in terms of solving this problem and getting their arms around all these processes and getting the most value from them, for them it goes all the way back to 1989 and that Valdez incident where, as an outcome of that incident, the ExxonMobil response was, we're not going to allow this to happen again. And the way we're going to approach this is we're going to implement an operational integrity management system. And that management system is going to drive everything we do. And, if you're thinking, to yourself now, okay, well, we don't have that, I would say that's something, really to consider, because without that management system, you're competing for resources based on, who's screaming the loudest and who's the most risk averse in your organization. And with the management system, you outline your policies and your procedures and what is important and what does need to be executed correctly and consistently throughout your organization. And again, for ExxonMobil, they, in terms of consistency and execution, they started on the left side. They wanted to get their arms around all those unplanned events and tie those unplanned events to their management system. So every time something unplanned happened, they could tie it to the control or the management system element that allowed that to happen. And so that allowed them to get visibility into how well their management system was being executed, the effect that management system was having on their organization, and they're really able to drive improvements. And again, you think about an ExxonMobil, they were doing this every asset, every business line, every part of the world. And so for them, this was a key initial step, but a very important step. And so they started with a few processes and driving this consistency and this execution. And this was back in, I'd say, the early 2000s, to where today they've moved to many proactive processes on this same platform. And so they're up to now managing over 75 different processes, such as the ones you see on the screen here, so that they really get these integrated and interrelating in the way that John has described. So again, thanks, John. I want to share that example, and I hope you're hearing from us. There's no silver bullet. It is a journey, and there are specific steps that can be taken to make improvements here.
Great. Todd, can you click me to the next slide? My browser closed.
Okay, the audience should be seeing your next slide now.
Great, thank you. So we know throughout every organization there are centers of excellence, if you will, that are doing some really great things, are leading the charge inside your organizations. There's never been a place where we visited with a company in the world that doesn't have parts of their organization that are just really moving in the right direction. The challenge always is when you look at the end result, they're running tremendous number of business processes we just went over, and even in the Exxon Mobile case, there are over 150 business processes that they're executing on a daily basis that are contributing to their knowledge about risk inside their organization. The challenge is that even for companies of that let's say maturity in their processes, there's still missing elements of the hazard control framework. If you look at the connection between the risk, if you will, and the associated controls, the effective controls, there's just knowledge being lost because it could be that a facility identified it, and because of, again, it's not organizational in nature, it's still, there's these centers of excellence, whether it be, again, a facility, part of the world, whatever. It doesn't drive that knowledge to be used by more than maybe the people that were involved because it's not prevalent yet. But that's beginning. We see trends now that this is really becoming the forefront of the goals of risk management inside of organizations. The key business processes, when we talk about language, we talk about language around you have a single business process. Let's take risk assessments as an example. And risk assessments goes through and assesses maybe a process or assesses an area of a facility or what have you. And what it does is it identifies risks and it classifies those risks. It scores those risks. Again, you can go very simple assessment or very deep assessment. But my point here is by assessing it, if you have a common language and a common methodology for assessing those risks in one business process, and now that's prevalent and that's used throughout your organization, that helps you be able to roll that up. Well, now take and say, okay, well, that's great. There's a tremendous ownership of that process by leaders in the organization. When we have this other process that's owned by another leader or another group, and they have tremendous passion for that process, well, with passion comes, sometimes a challenge with getting aligned, from an organizational message perspective. So we believe that, the common language is something that companies deal with every day, and in the pursuit of comprehensive risk management, it's something at the forefront that we believe what we're going to outline for you as we go through these slides. You'll see how to make that happen. And the last item here, there's tremendous lessons learned. I know all of you receive bulletins on, different safety things that a company has experienced, and it's, it might be a safety bulletin that comes to you in an email or, in a PDF type file or something like that. And that's fantastic. That's from the outside world in, if you will. But even inside of an organization, some of you probably have very mature processes around lessons learned or learning from incidents. The important thing here is there's still a breakdown in reviewing all the things that are happening in the organization and understanding how other parts of the organization can learn from it and effectively be accountable for putting in the right controls to mitigate that risk of an adverse effect.
Hey, John, so we're on the drive consistency slide.
Perfect. I'm back in now, Todd. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing we see is driving consistency, and consistent execution of processes starts with what we depict as the blue boxes below. That could be an individual process. Again, I'm going to use risk assessments. That could be your FMEA process, your PHA process, HAZOPs, whatever. But I'm going to start with risk assessments as the example that I'll use. And as you drive that process to be consistent across your organization, what you're driving that common language around that singular process. So that way, from a process basis, you can learn from all of the things, common processes that are being assessed throughout your organization. You can begin to build that initial hazard control library, the association between the risk and the controls or safeguards, if you will. But then you can also do prioritization based on that process, that's being executed. So it's not necessarily every process at this point. It's let's get one right. Let's get one right. Let's show that we can build a knowledge base. We can begin to share across the organization. We can begin to leverage and prioritize appropriately to reduce and relieve ourselves of unwanted risk. Okay. Once you have a level of consistency, then what you want to do is you want to expand out, and you want to expand out and look at what are the other critical business processes. Like I started with risk assessments. The next one might be your incident management process. And some of you might say, well, that's not really a key, it's definitely not a proactive, it's obviously the reactive side. But when you start looking at the reactive things that are happening in your organization, meaning the events, the incidents that are occurring, and you look at that, compare that to the things you're assessing, then you can start saying, well, we need to evolve our assessment categories to cover some of the areas of exposure that are hitting us, with the incident side. So you're beginning to bring together the language, the assessment of, or the classification of those risks, whether, again, they're on the proactive through the risk assessment process or on the reactive through the way you classify your consequence or assess the potential consequence that could have been in place, had a control measure failed. By getting multiple processes now at a facility level, you can begin to look at all your key risks and look at your risk register at the facility level and then start to prioritize, assess and prioritize. So that way, in essence, what you're doing, instead of taking a process-based approach where, well, this process got executed, it came up with 100 recommendations, we're going to go and execute those 100 recommendations. By having all your business processes together, what it allows you to do from a facility perspective and prioritization, because again, there's a lack of resources, what you do is you'll be able to look at your risks from a facility level, prioritize those actions, those control measures, based on the priority of the risk inside that particular facility. Now, once you have these many business processes building into your hazard control knowledge base, you're beginning to pull that data back into your business process execution where you're looking at the effectiveness of controls or when an event, an unplanned event occurs, an incident occurs, you can say, well, what was happening at the time of that incident? And then you can identify what controls should have been in place and whether they're missing control or did a control fail? Then how can I improve our knowledge base to help others understand that if you're using this control, this environment is not the right place to have that control. So that way, again, you can improve your control measure. You can improve your knowledge over time. Now, once you have an established you've now established some level of consistency. You've now built in with the execution. You've built in some of your language. Well, now it goes to visibility, because now you've built in the quality into your processes, where your data quality is good because your language is good. You're assessing things in the same manner. And the thing that this allows you to do is now you get to marry bottom-up risk management with top-down risk management. And many of you probably have some type of risk office inside your organization that looks at high-level risks and wants to push those down into the organization to say, we need to put control measures around these top 10 risks for our organization. And that's absolutely normal through every industry that we work with. The challenge always is at the facility level, without having the established execution methods, for all of your business processes and that facility-based prioritization process through the risk register, you're unable to assess the corporate risks that come down and where do they fit in your priority process, and to effectively communicate back to the corporate office or the regional offices to say, this is where it fits in my ranking of all the risks that we're working with on a daily basis. It may be that corporate risk isn't your number one risk. It may be number 37. And because you're 36 risks above that, truly, because you have the common language, they are truly assessed above that, and now you can prove and you can see. But on the flip side, corporate can then look and say, these are our top 10 risks. Where do we sit within our 30 facilities that we have out there? 15 of them have already completed the control measures that were requested. 10 of them are planned to have that completed in the next 30 days. And the remaining 5 are planned to do it in the next quarter. So what it does, it provides that visibility, that complete visibility. So it completes the cycle and allows each level of the organization to look at those key risks. The one final note on this slide is when we start looking at the value now of this hazard control knowledge base, now you're doing controls audits. So you're ensuring that not only that the controls are in place, but that they're effective controls. So you're testing the controls, so you're not, again, thinking that you have the perfect control in place, when in fact it's really not an effective control. It just so happens that it hasn't been triggered at that point.
Good. So, John, what I'd like to do, again, is interject here with a customer example and help to drive home John's points with consistency, execution, and visibility. At IHS, we've been fortunate to partner also with BASF, who is on their journey to address these challenges through their organization, which is also very large. Over 80,000, I think over 100,000 employees now within BASF, over 80 countries. And they found themselves with a lot of variation across their business, a lot of variation across the lines of business, variation across the regions in which they operate, variation among the ways they were approaching risk management in terms of the risk assessment templates they were using, the process behind those templates, and the mitigation actions that they were putting in place for the hazards that they were identifying. So for their very key step on their journey, they wanted to get all their risk assessments consistent across the entire organization. So they standardized a template and a process on one platform across the entire organization, and this is at every facility within BASF. So bottom up, to John's point, they're driving the bottom up risk management through this project, and we can't emphasize enough the importance of bottom up risk management. There is value to top down risk management. It's easy to implement, as you may well know. It's easier to put a top-down, corporate level risk assessment in place, but there is less value there because those assessments can be subjective and they don't always engage, the appropriate levels of the organization when they're assessing the risk. So the bottom up is really key here. BASF very keen to get that implemented, and that's going to provide them the visibility into their risks that they just don't have now. So they'll be driving a common language, as John mentioned, a common process, and executing that common process. And there's all types of value points that they're able to achieve through this. Just better data, like John mentioned, just reliability on the risk data, but because of this consistency and the ability to make better decisions. They're able to prioritize the risk, prioritize the activities and the actions they're being carried out everywhere, relating to these risks, and to allocate resources to solve the appropriate risk so that they have better operations, safer operations, more uptime, and overall better performance. So just a great example. And so their journey continues. They will, as a next step on their journey, integrate other risk-related processes. So building on the success of the risk assessment project, their plans are to introduce other risk-related processes such as other proactive programs and other incident management processes in the same way, consistent standardization across the organization. So as simple as that sounds, it is a very fundamental step in terms of solving these challenges.
Thank you, Todd. Now, through all the conversations that I've been fortunate to have over the years with risk practitioners in the field, this path that all of you are on takes a tremendous amount of patience. We use simple terms of driving consistency, improve execution, and increase visibility. Ultimately, every business process goes through its own life cycle. Because you may find that in the case of BASF, common risk assessment terminology and methodology was a key business driver for them. So they were able to get that business process off the ground and move that through its own cycle. Other companies, as Todd used, Exxon Mobile, they didn't take 150 business processes and say, you know what, let's take 150 business processes and move this as rapidly as possible. And let's do it all together. In fact, even today, after many years of working with them, they're still adding business processes and still nurturing other business processes into other areas of their business. So this is not only just business process based. It could be the division of your company. It could be in an individual facility. It does not have to be thought of as a global stance, although that should be the lens that's used. That is not the first step. Many companies rush down the road to try to get to that visibility step before they have good data or good quality data, good common language. So they're not able to do apples to apples comparison. But when you look at the lens of your goal is to make risk-based decisions, how do you do that? You do that with a comprehensive, reliable risk information system. And you can't do that without driving consistency with your business processes, getting the terminology right across business processes, through the execution, and then measuring the right things. Measuring the right things, which could be as broad as how am I executing these business processes? So are all of my business units executing the business process in the same manner? Or it could go to what business processes are the most effective to help us ensure that our risk management program is the most effective, meaning what business process is contributing the most to our risk management program? And those are things that over time you will be able to measure and ensure that you can continue to improve. So we want to leave you with a few questions to ask yourself, and maybe we've already led you here. But when we look at, we started talking about business processes and consistency, and maybe more importantly, where in your organization are some of your business processes being executed in the best way? And how are they being measured? How are they being viewed, from an outcome perspective? Because if you can start to take those nuggets of successes and drive your organization to change and to leverage that information in a better way, that's the ultimate goal of what you want. The common language is another theme that companies struggle with, but there's always pockets of success. It's rare that we see companies that at an organizational level everybody's speaking the same thing, regardless of business process being executed or business unit being discussed. So don't feel that you're behind the eight ball. It's a fairly common theme that industries and companies are struggling with, but ultimately they're starting to get it, and they're starting to be able to leverage that information in ways that they could not before. And finally, the risk knowledge. We really see the industry trend, and what's happening is pulling together this risk knowledge so it could be leveraged more effectively. I'll tell you today, I'll bet every one of you that you are using risk knowledge today in everything that happens in your organization. It's just that risk knowledge today is coming from the individuals that have the experience in the field, and your reliance is on people alone. And we believe that by extending this and augmenting the people knowledge with a solution that aggregates that information and keeps it very, very simple. So the contribution to your risk knowledge is happening automatically, and leveraging that data is happening automatically. You want to make this process sustainable.
Good. So we're going to transition to our Q&A time here, which John and I have really been looking forward to. So I see some questions coming in now that we're going to get to. And we're going to get to as many as possible. If we don't get to them all, I really encourage you to follow up with John and I. Send us an email. Share your stories. We know not everyone has this completely figured out. We'd love to know what's working with you, what you're struggling with. So we hope this is the beginning of some good dialogue. So, Kyle, I'll turn it over to you, I think, now to moderate some of the questions that are coming in for us.
Yes, thank you, both John and Todd. That was an excellent presentation. Before we jump into the Q&A real quick, I wanted to remind everyone of the short evaluation survey I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. It should be appearing on your screen now, and we ask that you please consider completing it to let us know your thoughts. If you don't see it, make sure your pop-up blockers are turned off. It is a pop-up that should be popping up. Your thoughts on this are pretty important because they help steer future webinars and presentations that we give you. So any input that you have will be greatly appreciated. And now let's get to some of the questions. I want to talk a little bit about the integration of the controls. I mean, how do you go about integrating controls and actions from various activities?
Okay, so integrating control, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, how do you integrate the controls and actions from various activities? Okay, so when we look at the varying, I'm going to make some assumptions here. When we're talking about activities, I'm going to take that from I could take it two ways. One, activities that are happening in the field. The other is the process activities, so that way you're relating the actions that are occurring and the controls. I would say that
I'm going to take the first one, which is the activities that happen in the field. And in the oil and gas world, I guess in general, and this goes broader than that, but the JSA process, or again, it's job safety analysis or job site inspection programs. I mean, there's lots of different names for them, but it's where you're identifying, the key steps that are happening in a job, the associated hazards, and then the associated controls. And in a lot of cases, those are done very job-by-job basis and not necessarily leveraged by organizations. So one of the ways in which that is done, and we see people doing it today, is taking some of their JSA data along with their risk assessment data, so that way there's the common terminology between how they're assessing the risks. So that way if they've identified something on the JSA level that is associated to a hazard or risk that was identified through another means, whether it's on the incident side or another proactive process, they're then able to associate the controls to that to then ensure that when you're doing an observation or something like that, you make sure that the right controls are associated to the activities that are being performed in the field. Now, there's probably a little bit more context to that question that I'm missing, so if there's more, please let's connect after this session today.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there specific processes that are more effective than others at risk identification?
Todd, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I'd say to answer that question, my first response is yes, there are some processes that are good, but there's probably not something that you're missing. In other words, if you have a process that you're using now to identify risk, I would encourage you to focus on that process and improving that process as opposed to introducing a new process into your organization. So if you're using a HAZOP process, PHA, process hazard analysis process, FMEA, failure modes effects and analysis, those are some popular ones. But if you're using something like that or even something unique that you've created internally, our recommendation would be focus on improving the foundation that you've laid now. So if a few users are executing that process now, then focus on expanding it so you have that consistency across your organization. Also focus on the rigor which that process is being followed. So is it going through the right steps? As they identify the risks, or are people following the right steps that process asks for? Are they following up, and mitigating those risks once they've been discovered? Focus on those fundamentals of a risk management cycle as opposed to trying to come up with a new process that you might use to identify risk. Now, there may be a gap if you don't have something that you're doing now to proactively identify risk, and we would say yes, fill that gap with a proven process that for your industry is working. But I would say don't think there's some mysterious process that you're not using that needs to be implemented. I know I'm repeating myself, but the key here is build on the good things that you're doing now. Expand those things. Go deeper, with those things that you're doing now as opposed to introduce something new.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's take a look. There's a question here about a kind of a generic company that perhaps lacks maturity in risk-based approaches. What are some tactical formative steps in integrating risk into that enterprise?
So I think change management in general, risk, as much as risk has been around for, maybe forever, the use of risk information in an effective manner is new. And introducing that into, I'm just going to use the generic companies out there, to just introduce that, to try to get that to gain some traction, is to identify, again, where the early wins can be and begin to use the terminology and help the company understand the use of what is a risk, what is a hazard, what's a control or safeguard. Get some of the very simple, I say simple, unfortunately it's really not that simple, because a lot of cases we meet with a lot of companies, and even within an industry, those terms that I just said, and I only said 4, are defined differently. And so it may be that we can help you with that, but also it may be that you organizationalize the definition of those terms. But once you have those terms defined, then what you do is you take the business processes that are currently being executed, which every single company at some point is executing an incident investigation process. So if you begin to look at the outcomes of an incident investigation process in terms of the potential risk, what hazards were we exposed to, and use the terminology that you've defined. What you're doing is you're starting that language and starting to connect what happened to how it can be prevented through the other business processes that you already are executing every single day. So the way in which we've seen probably the most traction, and Todd, you can extend this in a moment, but is beginning with that base terminology and using that base terminology throughout the business process that you're talking about. But don't step too fast. Take 1 or 2 business processes at a little bit higher. I'll give you an example. At a company, Valero, they do a lot of good things. They're in the refining business, but they do a lot of interesting things. But the one thing that they've done over the 10 years I've had the opportunity to work with them is they take baby steps, and it doesn't mean they're going slow. It means they're very managed, and the reason they're managed is they want it to be adopted. So what they'll do is they'll take very high level, let's say a facility risk assessment, and they'll do it at that level and then propagate that down. Or they'll take key high-risk business processes and do a risk assessment on those. Rather than saying we're going to do everything, we're going to risk assess everything, which that would cripple an organization and really make it difficult to change, they take those baby steps. And what happens is, because they're consistent and they have measurable results that they can share back to the organization of the success that it had on operations, they're able to then take that next step to go to the next level of rigor in that business process, because the organization that ultimately has to adopt it sees the value of it. And if there's one thing I'd leave you with is keep it really simple. As much as we want to get to the end game as rapidly as possible, it's the successes that are going to get us there.
All right, great. Thank you. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I apologize. There are a lot of questions out there that we did not get a chance to answer. However, as I'll remind you, any of the unanswered questions will be forwarded on to John and Todd, and then they can get back to you. Once again, I hope you take the time to fill out the evaluation survey on the top of the screen and give us your feedback. And with that, that concludes today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. I'd like to thank John, Todd, IHS, and all of you for listening in. Thank you, and have a great day.